Someone else is passing gas in my room. Have you ever been scared witless inside your own home? Were you alone at the time? I lived alone after college, half a country away from my family. That's when I started smelling something that couldn't have been mine. I would wake up to the scent. Foul, plaster-splitting clouds of flatulence hung like a thundercloud over my bed. What can you do if you're afraid of your own apartment? Eventually, no matter how terrified you are, you'll need to go back home. But you'll need to fall asleep. That's the worst part. I could almost feel thick ropes of odor curling around my neck like a nuzzling cat, licking my nostrils before seeping into every pore and straining my teeth a muddy yellow. I had nearly put my feet on the bedroom floor, but I froze. Was someone under my bed? I slowly moved my legs back onto the mattress, heart pounding. It had to be my imagination, right? I must have eaten something that really disagreed with me. Maybe a possum had gotten stuck in the wall right next to my bed, and his festering body was spilling out the decaying scent of fresh rot directly into my face. That would be horrifying to be sure, but people are much scarier than any animal. What was I supposed to do? Stay in bed all day? So I took a deep breath, leapt onto the floor, snatched my phone like a relay baton, and sped out the door. I spent the entire Saturday outside. Having just moved to Washington, D.C., I didn't know anyone within a 1,913-mile radius. Most people didn't give a second glance to the girl in Franklin Square who looked like she'd rolled out of bed and onto the grass. Then the sun went down, and I had to go back home. The fart smell was waiting for me. Knowing that an intruder would likely steal a butcher knife from my grasp, I snatched a fork from the kitchen instead. With a trembling hand, I lifted my duvet and slowly pointed my cell phone light into the dark recesses beneath my bed. Nothing. Of course, there was no intruder. I was being paranoid beyond reason. I laughed softly to myself, then padded to the kitchen to eat yesterday's Panda Express. Nothing can make me feel quite as good as orange chicken. I opened the door and frowned. It was gone. I was almost sure that half had been left over from yesterday. There was even a drop of sauce on the shelf. Disappointed, I grabbed a paper towel and wiped away the sauce. When I opened the trash can to toss the paper towel, I saw the orange chicken box poking out from beneath some garbage, as though someone had buried it out of sight. Was that the only odd thing? Olivia asked, looking at me like I was a freak. I had decided to talk with Olivia from work about it because I still don't have any local friends. Well, I responded tentatively, wondering what I should say. Would it be better to downplay the whole situation to appear more normal? Or should I go with the truth in hopes of drumming up sympathy and intrigue? No, I answered honestly. I tried to think of a nice way to say the next thing before realizing that there wasn't any. I had left a used, condom, she blurted. No, I whispered. Not since, it's been a while. No, it was a tampon. Oh, a tampon, she repeated loudly enough to echo across the office. My face burned. Yes, I said, there was one in the trash. Anyway, my trash can was almost full, so I got up to grab a new liner. By the time I got back to the bathroom, it was gone. She gasped. Your whole trash can? No, I said, just the tampon. Olivia gasped again. Girl, have you checked every inch of your apartment? I sighed. 3 times. I live on the 3rd floor and keep my windows sealed, so I don't know what animals I'd even have to look for. She folded her arms and raised an eyebrow. I don't know either, but it seems like you need a different kind of help. She pursed her lips. I might have an extra. She turned and plunged into her desk drawer. I didn't know if I'd be more horrified at finding she had a stash of guns or a pile of used tampons. But she pulled out something I never would have expected. St. Joseph protects the home, she explained while handing a candle to me. It had a man's face printed on one side, a halo enwreathed his head. I answered tentatively. Thanks. You can thank me if that works, she said. You've either got a demon or a person bothering you, and I don't know which is worse. That night, I stared at the candle, which was sitting on the floor by my bed, since I was too poor to afford a bedside table. We were tied in a staring contest. "You know, I don't believe in you," I snapped in a voice that was supposed to sound authoritative. "You're not even actually white. You're a Galilean carpenter from the Jewish Middle East." The candle didn't say anything, and I felt stupid for talking to a candle. "Of course I'm going to light you," I said in response to the question it didn't ask. "What other options do I have?" I struck the match with shaking fingers, not looking forward to another night of surrendering to unknown sleep. "At least you'll absorb some of the fart smell," I said. I had a hot dream that night. Very freaking hot. Enough to bleed into the crazy, hazy border between hard dreaming and soft waking. I was uncomfortable. The sheets were drenched with sweat. Flipping over meant my burning torso met the chilly sweat pool, and that jolted me into a sitting position. Man, it was hot. Smoky, too. My sleep-addled brain tried to make sense of what was happening. My room was on fire. Every wall was burning. I realized that I wasn't going to survive. I froze for a moment, wondering just how badly it was going to hurt. Then a flaming ball of fabric landed on my duvet, instantly scorching my shin. I yelped and jumped onto the ground, which burned beneath my feet. I was sprinting before I was thinking, and I quickly found myself running outside into the cool air of the night. I felt weak enough as I later shivered on the edge of the fire truck, covered only in my pajamas and the blanket they had given me. When the fire captain strode up to me, wearing 100 pounds of equipment and a stern look on his face, I was ready to melt into the ground. "We got the fire out before it threatened any other apartments, but you won't be able to go back into yours for a while." He folded his arms. "Tell me, did you go to sleep with a lit candle in the room?" I was cold, exhausted, embarrassed, and ready to cry by the time I sat down with the police investigators. "Look, I'm sorry about the candle," I moaned as the two men sat down in front of me. It took all my effort to avoid bursting into tears. "I've been living here less than 2 weeks. I know it's all my fault, and—" "Claire," the first cop interrupted, "you're not in any trouble." He was a flabby man and spoke in a voice that tried unsuccessfully to sound comforting. I finally snapped. "Then why am I here? It's been hours. All I want to do is sleep, and—" The second one, older and stern-looking, interrupted this time. "Have you noticed anything unusual in your apartment, Claire?" he asked gruffly. "Anything that seemed out of place, inexplicable?" My heart instantly clicked to jackhammer mode. What kind of unusual things?" I inquired meekly. They gave each other a knowing look. It lingered painfully long. Finally, I burst. "Look," I yelled, "I've had a really awful go of things. I'm a long way from my friends and family. I just burned my freaking apartment down. Yes, things have been strange, and now you won't tell me what's going on." I was hyperventilating. The stern cop looked at me pityingly. I stared back, on the verge of tears. The cop sighed. "This was taken in your bedroom," he said, sliding a photograph toward me. My stomach dropped, and I couldn't tell down from up. "No," I whispered, "this isn't possible." "Yes, Claire," he said. "These photos were taken an hour ago." I turned away, but the image was burnt into my mind, and now it all made sense. A strange man had been living with me in my apartment for weeks. He'd stolen food from my fridge and taken tampons out of the trash. He'd been hiding in a hollowed-out cavity in my box spring, completely unseen. This man was sleeping inches below me every night. Since exiting his cubbyhole must have been difficult, he would wait until I left for work, then return before I came home. Tonight, for reasons that only he would know, he had finally decided to emerge while I was sleeping. That's what had knocked over the candle. He wasn't able to free himself before the flames had consumed the room. That's why the photo in front of me showed the charred skeleton of a man trapped in the burned remains of my bed frame, with no flesh left on him except for a lump of smoldering scalp and a solitary watching eyeball. Claire, unfortunately, ends the story before we can see her become a suspect in a criminal investigation, since this would definitely look to the cops like she had offed somebody and tried burning the body to destroy evidence. When the cops find a random body hidden away in your apartment, they don't just assume that someone was living in your furniture. I should know. There's a reason I can't get hired outside of YouTube. In all seriousness, I wasn't expecting this story to actually end on a sort of creepy note. When the entire basis of your story is that someone's been passing gas in your home, I think it's only natural for most readers to assume they're getting into something comical. This story had its humorous beats, but it never quite forgot what it was. It made me think of the Gooseflumps parody novels, which arguably got scarier than Goosebumps at certain points. This story also bears resemblance to real news stories about people who have discovered strange people living in their homes. Usually this is discovered because of missing food. The question is what this story might have looked like if it was serious from the very start. Thankfully, with nosleep being the type of subreddit that it is, it wasn't hard to find another story that took a different approach to this story than the OP here. The following story is different enough that it won't feel like the same story, but it might be interesting to pay attention to which common threads you see and why they seem to be so common. If you made it this far in the video, consider liking and subscribing for more videos coming. My wife thinks someone is in our house. To give a little background, me and my wife have been together for 4 years and married for just a couple of months now. She's always been jumpy, and it's funny to get a rise out of her once in a while. She used to refuse to watch horror movies with me, but since I love them, she's sat through a good number of them now. We just bought a house far away from any family and friends, and her worrying has gotten worse since then. I don't want to come off as a jerk, but sometimes it can be a bit much. She will call me in the morning while I'm on my way to work and say, "I think there's someone in the house," which, of course, there never is. But I love her and I want her to feel comfortable, so I humor her. The home we purchased is a 1940s colonial-style home with beautiful crown molding, glass doorknobs, and creaky floorboards. When you walk through the house, the creaks can be heard everywhere, so it seems like there's someone in the house. But that's what happens in an old house. The floors creak. Every day now, she will either call me or yelp from the kitchen that she can hear someone walking up and down the stairs. I go check, and there's no one there. Rinse and repeat. But last night something changed. Something happened. I awoke last night to my wife sitting up in bed, eyes wide and shaking my shoulder. "There's someone downstairs, walking around. I can hear them," she said with a terror in her eyes that I've never seen before. I sat up, wiped the sleep from my eyes, and listened. This time, she was right. I could hear what resembled footsteps walking right under our floor, which is where the staircase started. Knowing that there's no way anyone was in here, I told her to relax and go back to sleep. She wouldn't budge. She whispered in an angry tone that there was no way in heck she was going back to sleep. I sighed and got up out of bed. I creeped over to our door and bent down to knob level. I looked through the keyhole and out into the hall. Nothing. Too dark. At this point, she had actually freaked me out. The footsteps still came from the landing at the bottom of the stairs. It almost sounded like pacing. I looked back at my wife, who was sat in the bed with the covers up to her eyes. She wasn't saying a word. I looked around the room for a weapon, coming up with a screwdriver I had used earlier in the day. I slowly turned the knob and looked out into the hall. At first, there was nothing. No one on the stairs. No one in the hallway. Nothing. But before I closed the door, my eyes locked on the window. Ice ran through my veins. My heart stopped. My t-shirt's armpits welled with sweat. In the reflection of the window was a person standing on our steps. The only thing that showed in the dark hallway were yellow, slanted teeth and bleach-white eyes. I could not tell from the short glance whether it was real or not, so I closed the door and walked back into the bedroom. I was too scared to tell her what I saw, worried we'd have to sell the whole place. The footsteps stopped as I stood leaning against the closed door and glanced at my wife. "It's nothing, baby," I said. "Go back to bed." Her shoulders loosened, and a long, relieved sigh came out of her. We both laid down and went back to sleep. This morning, I woke up, and my wife was gone from our beds. I thought that was funny, since she always sleeps later than me. I assumed she went to grab some coffee downstairs. I threw on some shorts and trotted down to the dining room, only to see there was no sign of my wife and no smell of coffee. I yelled for her through the house and heard nothing. I looked out the window, and her car was still there. Her wallet was sitting untouched near the fridge. Even her phone was lying on the floor near the bed. I'm worried something happened to her, and it may be my fault. I have no clue what to do. There are a few comments on this at the time of writing, but one of them is interesting. Since most commenters generally admonish this OP for not doing something when he saw a creeper in their house, the OP has written a comment in response. He says, "I just figured I was tired and seeing things. I regret it every second. I've contacted the police, and they said that they will send out a search team shortly. I'm currently in my car right now, crying across the street from a Dollar Tree. All I want is my wife home safe." I can't imagine for the life of me what possessed this OP to drive to a Dollar Tree while his wife was missing. They have some great cheap candy, and there are so many shoplifters in that store, you can almost always find an open bag of chips. Great comfort foods, but is that where your head would be at right now? Then again, strange decisions are one of the common threads I mentioned earlier. Both of these stories had at least two main things in common. The first is that both OPs had just moved far away from friends and family. It's no surprise you usually see this in horror, since it isolates the protagonist from anyone they might call for help. But that almost seems like an unnecessary trope, since the other thing these stories have in common is how much people will apparently let slide before calling for help. But maybe that's something to think about. It's common to judge stupid decisions in the stories we read. The thing is, we know what kind of story we're reading. They don't. So the next time you don't get out of bed because you assume that noise you heard was the house settling or the wind rustling the trees, maybe you aren't being as practical as you think. Maybe you're just setting yourself up to become a character in the next horror story. It's something to think about. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.